This short podcast is about my direct observations in Afghanistan war, where I was stationed from about 2002 to almost 2020, and I saw the USA and the NATO forces closely. Now, the first impression which I got, and which was agreed by my friend who had been posted as the Pakistani military advisor with the Americans at the Bagram Air Base and could accompany Americans in operations launched near the Afghanistan Pakistan border. This impression of mine was confirmed by this officer of colonel rank. Later, he became a brigadier. Our first impression was that Americans were strategically clueless, rather dumb. This was our impression, joint impression, based on various operations in which we saw them. Operationally, also, they were clueless and mediocre. Tactically brave, yes, and they had overwhelming power. They had excellent SOPs, which ensured that the lowest casualties occurred. At that level, they were very good. Now, a word about the US commanders. McChrystal and Petraeus were downright ambitious, callous, and heartless people. They agreed to the deployment of the US Army in Helmand just to further advance their careers. There was no reason why American Army should have been deployed in Helmand. There was no reason why the British Army should have been deployed in Helmand, except morphia paste, a shallow reason, strategically. This, is the saddest part of the whole affair. The American Secretary of Defense, Mr. Gates, was so dumb, I would say so outright dumb, that in his book, Duty, which I would say is dereliction of duty, and duty my foot, I would say. This is how I titled that review. Mr. Gates had no clue why the US Army was being deployed in Helmand. Such was their strategic cluelessness. Now, a point about Ukraine and again US strategic cluelessness. The NATO and the USA have been surviving on what historians have defined as Palmersonian bluff. There was a British Prime Minister, Palmerston, who was more famous for seducing wives and daughters and sisters of eminent men rather than statesmanship. Now, this character, Palmerston, used to bluff the Russians whenever they wanted to attack, and his bluffs were, successfully checkmated by the Russians, like when they invaded and crushed the Polish uprising in 1863 or so. So NATO has and the USA have been surviving on Palmersonian bluffs. They don't have that manpower, they don't have that will to sacrifice. They can't match the Russians as far as the will to sacrifice is concerned. You see, they just don't have that spine. And I'm very glad that Mr. Putin has called their bluff and has invaded Ukraine. And you see, the world is based on dual standards. There is no morality, there are no international relations. International relations, ethics in international relations were destroyed when the Americans and the British invaded Iraq in 2003. That was the end of ethics, morality, and any sort of convention in international relations. And now, when Putin invades Ukraine, he's a devil. But when you two intellectually dishonest powers invaded Iraq in 2003, you were angels. My foot. So this is a short summary, and we will have a more detailed podcast later.